Joseph Bendik with the Navitas organization.
Joseph Bendik with the. I'm sorry. What was the name of the company again?
Yeah, so it's Joseph Bendik, but I go by JB Bendik, and it's called the Navitas organization, or TNO for short.
Navitas organization. Okay. I just call you the social media maestro, so I apologize. I didn't write down your company name. I just wrote down the social media maestro because you're all over the place, especially on LinkedIn. And you enjoy the social media, don't you?
I do, mainly because I've been a big fan before it became as popular as it is today. So I think I helped break out the energy world within LinkedIn. And so I kind of, give myself a little pat on the back because I was on the forefront of that before it became as popular, I think, in the past year or so.
Yeah, it's really taken off in the energy world without a doubt. That's funny you say that. I kind of feel like I was the same way with what I'm doing. We've got videos of 2007 doing videos from our studio. We had live bands in studios, and boy, what was it? You Watch, I think was the name. Live stream, that's what it was, live stream. We were headlined on there on a few Saturday nights. I used to do a show called City Guide, Saturday Night City Guide. That was the name of it. We have live bands come by and socialites and all kinds of different things. The show was live on a Saturday night down on the Strip. It was great. It was a lot of fun. And that was 2007. We had video and all kinds of different stuff. And I laugh because I think, I was a little bit more ahead of myself back then than I am today. Do you feel like that? Like you were further ahead, back when you were first starting out than you are today? Because, you kind of have to take a step back every now and then to, stay with the mainstream, if you will. Otherwise, you're too far outside the pack. Did I just make any sense?
Yes. I've always taken, the approach of what will happen in the future, more of an idealist and innovator in that capacity. I always, believe that staying in the same lane and doing it the way that's always been done has always been the downfall of companies. And someone who believes that, the small startup, in someone's garage or in their home should be considered, a possible threat. So it should always be adjusting. And so when technology came out as a platform, I adopted it very early.
Let's talk about innovation a little bit. Of course, one of the reasons we brought you on the program today, JB, Joseph Bendik, is that the top stories, the top trends, the top issues of 2019, innovation, of course, without a doubt, is always, at least recently in the past 5 years, is definitely one of the top 10 stories, trends, and innovations, if not top 5. What are some of the innovations that you've seen out there or that you think have created an issue? For example, flaring, of course, is not only an issue by itself, but a lot of the technologies and innovations that go into flaring. We've seen some amazing strides in that, but at the same time, we've seen some work that needs to be done too, probably more on the bureaucracy side. But talk to me a little bit about some innovations you've seen in the last year.
Well, yes, certainly, and I appreciate you having me on your show today. Within the flaring, there's two sides of it. Number one is going to be the state regulations, state and federal regulations, and with that comes the environmentalists, the climate activism, things of that nature that are trying to force, for lack of better words, people to be more responsible with flaring and methane, CO2, carbon capture, etc. The other side of it that I take and I try to educate energy companies on is the fact, if you look at the amount of actual waste, not so much the environmental impact, but the actual waste of what you can do with that natural gas, especially on power generation. And if you look at it go a little more deeper, if you look and take the position of a landowner or a rights owner, and imagine if all of a sudden you're driving past your leasehold where you have an interest, and you see them flaring, and it's literally burning money. And so if you take and look at both those sides, the environmental impact and the waste impact of it, the innovation that's taken off has really, it's there, but it hasn't been adopted or accepted. And I believe that's probably most likely because it's new, and nobody in the oil field wants to raise their hand to be the first to adopt new technologies. But when they do work, they will surely stand up, as I always tell everybody, and claim that was their idea. So it goes down to being able to educate the oil service companies and the operators on the true benefits of technology, especially within gas generation, turbo machinery, and being able to literally save the environment and also save dollars.
You mentioned mineral rights and the flaring and the waste, and that's something I've brought up in the past on this program for years. We've had kerfuffles happening with mineral rights as far as ownership, who owns them, this and that. Flooding of lands creates kerfuffles and arguments. The one thing that I've mentioned before, and I'd love to get your opinion on this, is, okay, subsidies. One of the dirty words in energy and one of the dirty words with capitalism and everything else, but they exist. I mean, there's probably more subsidies than non-subsidies in the world today. I mean, I guarantee you, if you took a look at the top, 200 company, 500 companies in the United States, I bet they get some sort of tax breaks or subsidies. And a lot of people nowadays put it right into their balance sheet and profit and loss in terms of if without them, their companies don't work. So when you look at subsidies and what the solar and wind industry has gotten in the last 40 years, 50 years, and really how much they've ramped up in the last 20 years. If we took a look at those subsidies just in solar and wind and said, okay, you haven't reached your milestones, so instead of giving you more money to not reach milestones, what if we took half of that and gave it to natural gas? Because we have all this flaring going on and nobody likes the flaring. And now the natural gas subsidy there would go to these crazy innovators who are away from their families, sleeping on well sites, checking gauges and making liquefied natural gas, all these different things. But the other part of it that I really enjoy is what you mentioned, the mineral rights. A lot of times, in most cases, from my understanding, the mineral owners are not getting paid on the flared gas. I think they might in some counties, but for the most part, they're not. If it was subsidized, then all of a sudden you'd almost be giving a local economic impact to a lot of these mineral owners. And then the local cafes would get some money, et cetera, and the hardware hanks of the world, if you will. So I don't know. I just kind of really loaded up a big question there for you, but it's more of a discussion, of the shifting of some renewable to natural gas, because keep in mind, natural gas only has one carbon molecule. It's very clean energy. And the mineral owners and everything else, just your thoughts on the mineral rights when flaring, not receiving their subsidies if it's flared, and then the subsidies in terms of shifting it from renewables. If you followed my rambles there at all.
No, I certainly did. Yeah, what's going to be an interesting topic coming here, with the presidential elections heading into, this upcoming new decade, 2020, and the media hasn't really picked up on it yet, but I believe they will, is the renewing of the tax credits on the federal level for solar energy. There is a substantial percentage of money that is given as a tax credit if you implement solar panels commercially and residentially. And that, underwriting by the government has completely blown up the solar panel industry. I'll just keep it as that. And in about 2 years, I believe it's 2 years, unless it's renewed by Congress, it's going to expire. And I'm curious to see exactly if it's going to be sustainable, pun intended, where these companies can survive without that government subsidy that encourages investors, because they know that they basically have a guaranteed, capital return, because they're going to get money from the government for implementing it. And I would be very interested to see if that's going to be renewed, or if it's going to be a hot topic during the presidential election, because it's going to put Trump against a crucial issue as far as subsidies, energy, natural gas, solar. And so on the subsidy side, I would really focus in and look at that, and look at how that's impacted and possibly even inflated the demand side of solar, because it is underwritten by the federal government. To spin this back onto the natural gas side and how you can, lack of a better word, subsidize the natural gas industry, I believe not so much subsidies as the ability on the power generation side, where you can actually microgrid especially here in the Permian, where people can be self-contained power generation on their facilities, on their e-frac, eventually on their e-drill, and not actually have to run out a lot of power lines from Encore and pay an electric bill. They can be self-contained, powering themselves. And then eventually, especially here in Texas, if they build these microgrids off of natural gas, any excess power could then be sold back into the ERCOT system. And so I think there could be a very great opportunity on power generation where you could actually incentivize power producing companies to use natural gas generated power.
Another topic that was brought up was pipelines as critical infrastructure, whether it's natural gas or crude oil pipelines. It is critical infrastructure according to many government agencies and laws and things like that, but they don't enforce it. They don't necessarily treat it as such. Protests are increasing. Protesters it's an occupation now. It's no longer a lifestyle passion. It's just a career passion, I guess, or a job passion, because majority of the protesters get paid these days, at least the ones in leadership positions do. Talk to me a little bit about your thoughts about pipelines as critical infrastructure. Just had the Keystone pipeline spill the other day. So obviously that's going to be some major ammunition for environmentalists, and it's a little bit of a PR setback for the oil and gas industry. Pipelines, how do you see pipelines in the past year and in 2020?
One of the most, I think, sometimes unrecognized, unappreciated individual in the oil and gas industry are pipeliners. The amount of sacrifice that they make going out and laying piping throughout the continental United States is amazing. And I think the media, in a narrative that they control, when you have one spill out of the tens of thousands of pipe that's in the ground, the miles upon miles of it, it's a very small fraction of the whole. And they focus in on that. And I think it's an undue. It gets me upset because they focus in on that one little small incident and don't look at the whole picture of all of the greatness that pipeliners and infrastructure and midstreamers provide to our country and to the oil and gas service companies getting the product to market. Heading into 2020, especially here in the Permian, I believe, depending upon capital budgets that are going to be starting to reset end of this year into the first quarter, January, February of next year, is going to determine the amount of money that some of these operators have to do new drills and be able to keep production steady or slightly increased. The amount of backlog on the pipeline side is plentiful. And so those projects that have been, fit out, final investment decision are going to be going into, being processed out. I think if we don't see an uptick in some production, that possibly some of these projects on the pipeline side will be temporarily put on hold or scaled back because of the amount of line that's finally going to be coming online. The pipeline always tries to stay ahead of the demand. It's so hard to pinpoint because any step back on the capex on an operator side to pull back on production is ultimately going to affect the amount of product that's moved in the pipelines. I think going into 2020, you probably will see a small pullback on the infrastructure side or more hesitation because there's not a clarity in the market as to what production is going to be heading into the second quarter, midpoint of 2020, with all of the current supply that's in the market and also the companies pulling back 20-30% of their capex heading into 2020. Those headwinds, I think, are going to put a little bit downward pressure on the midstream companies.
One of the comments that William Prentice, the CEO of Meridian Energy Group, said earlier in the year, which I think is a very it's a reality. I think it was here last year, but I think it's the reality when it comes to pipelines being delayed and refineries. A lot of it has to do with the orchestration of the litigation that a lot of the activists and opponents have to pipelines and et cetera. I think the pullback, I think part of it's going to be litigation. Have you noticed an uptick in people talking about how much time they're spending in court and attorneys' fees, and geez, we might as well bring a guy on full time as legal counsel in our small little 30-person organization because the numbers would be better. Are you hearing much on the legal side? I mean, like I said, I've heard a few people actually refer to it as the new normal. Just you have to do a year of litigation before you can break a shovel now.
It's interesting that you say that, just because recently in the media has picked up. I believe it's I think it's a Kinder Morgan pipeline. I believe that's running through the Austin area, and it caused a lot of uproar. And so now it's pushed back, I believe, a year now because of lawsuits being filed, litigation. And I'm sure a lot of these companies are used to to fighting that. And thankfully, over the past couple of years, the regulatory bodies, especially on the federal level, FERC, have been more transparent, open to expedite permits and legalities compared to previous administrations. So that has helped tremendously. But I think, going back to this pipeline as an example going through Austin, I sit back and I kind of put my head against the wall because I wonder who on the right-of-way side or on the design side decided to run a pipeline through one of the most more hostile areas to oil and gas, being that of the Austin area. And I think the lawsuit part of it is a tactic to stall through litigation and starvation financially. But I think it goes down to we as a community have to communicate better to the public on exactly what goes on in the pipeline process and on the midstream and on the downstream side of it, because I truly believe we in the oil and gas industry know each other. It's a big brotherhood, a big sisterhood of people, and sometimes we can become bubble-like where we just pile around each other, and we really don't do a good job communicating to the public exactly what we do in the industry, the regulations that are already in place, the amount of legalities that have to be done, and how after pipeline is laid, the community effects of that pipeline and the restoration and remediation of the area is tremendous. But we allow the narrative to be controlled by a couple of the, like you said, protesters. Media picks it up, and it paints a negative picture when all of the legalities in the world that you can do from a lawsuit perspective can be fought in the court of public opinion. And I think we as an industry as a whole have to do a better role of educating the public. And when we start doing that, I believe a lot of those matters on the litigation side will actually decrease.
So let me ask you this. How do we get past the platitudes? Because I've heard this now for a year, that we need to do a better job of communicating. Actually, we started hearing this last year too. And I agree wholeheartedly. In fact, this summer I went on a few speaking circuits, and I wasn't a very popular guy. I was in some circles, but I wasn't in other circles, because I did kind of a gut check, and I just said, let's look at the last 10 years. We've made more money and spent more money as an industry than any other 10-year period in history. That's $100 oil. So there's very few can argue against that. And look what's happened. We've pretty much gotten a backward ban in New York and in Colorado, to where the governors are actually openly declaring a war on oil and gas. Back in the summer when I was talking about this, we had two presidential candidates, Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, that were openly talking about banning fossil fuels. And I said, I've never heard of this, a candidate coming out and saying they're going to ban an industry. I've never even heard of anybody saying they want to ban the cigarette industry. Regulate it more, but not ban it. So when I started hearing this, and I said, when I look around at these conferences, I see the same people, talking to the same people, spending the same money, using the same resources with the same people. So I don't know why we expect to have a different result. And we got the new Green Deal now trying to ban our industry in 10 years. I don't know about you guys, but I'd like to come back to this conference in 10 years, and I want to drive. And you could kind of hear a pin drop a little bit, because for me, it was a big moment. I mean, I felt like if this conversation doesn't happen, pretty soon it won't matter, because the oil and gas seems to be falling behind more and more every year. And for just those reasons I named out to you, that, we've got several other states now trying to do back. Oh, Wyoming did a ban in their BLM land. So I don't know if you want to tackle that and comment on it or not. To me, it was a very in-your-face way to say, we've got to make some changes and start doing some things differently. And that's why we went out and sponsored Johnny Green, the environmentalist, because he's going out to high schools and junior highs and grade schools and rock concerts and parades and engaging with kids and parents in Austin and in Fargo and in Boulder, all the places that kind of get known as the blue anti-fossil fuel areas, going right in there. Will it work? No idea. But at least it's trying something different and engaging with people that are not, part of the same realm that I've seen for the past 10 years. So I'm not trying to be altruistic, not trying to be controversial, just trying to have a conversation about some realities of the industry. Just your thoughts on that. And you can tell me to take a flying leap if you want, but just your thoughts.
No, I'm with you on what you have stated on that, and you bring up a really good point. The true, what's really going on when you really take a step back, and I don't want to go, super political with political terms, but it really is indoctrination that's going on within the educational system, because we haven't done a good enough job being able to push back the narrative and push back the educational system, where people are going in, even in elementary schools. I saw a video of someone had posted where there was a cartoon and their kid was watching it, and they literally basically came out and turned a rig into a solar wind farm or something. And this individual was absolutely shocked. This is like I think it was on one of the major networks. It was on a kid's show, and he was floored on it. But that's what's going on right now. All throughout, they're just told over and over again that any type of fossil fuel is evil. Clean energy, wind and solar are the only way to go. And there's no one to challenge or push back on it. And in that generation, the last decade, are now in decision-making roles. They're coming out of college. They're going into the workforce. And so it's very hard when someone has been indoctrinated a certain way to even push back, even to have a conversation where you can talk professionally. It's so emotionally involved.
That's a really tough word to say, indoctrination, because most people will just stop listening to you right there. That's what I found. You can give them verified data. Dan Haley, he's a Colorado Oil and Gas Association executive. President. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Mr. Dan Haley or not, but he spoke on a panel that I spoke on this summer. And he brought that up about how in Colorado, I believe now, Dan Haley, if you're listening and I'm wrong, please correct me, but from my memory, sitting on that panel, he said that the Colorado school system didn't even have oil and gas or fossil fuels as an option for the kids to choose about how to improve energy. It was some sort of multiple choice that had to do with energy, and wind was on there and solar was on there and fossil fuels wasn't even on there. And I thought, wow, you got like 90% of the planet has to rely on, or at least America has to rely on, coal and fossil fuels, for energy, and they just flat out take it out. That tells me that they're getting the next generation ready for a life without it. That's what it told me right there in the moment. And that was an actual example of the word indoctrination being used in real time. So the only reason I bring that up is because I know how difficult it is to have a conversation with somebody and you start using actual words that are in its Webster's definition, its form, like indoctrination, because I believe that you're using it in its proper definition and its proper use in a sentence. But I think most people will look at you as you're kind of a lobbyist for the oil and gas industry if you're doing it. Like, do you know what I mean by that? Or when you, I don't know, maybe I'm.
Yeah. What you see what happens is people. You've got to be able to think objectively and remove the emotions out of it. Even myself, where I study up and I read a lot, and my degree, take a step back, is in political science, and so I'm used to looking at things objectively, looking at things methodically, even if I disagree with them, because the best way you can take your what you believe is right is to understand where the other person's coming from and basically have them self-realize that their point is wrong. I mean, that's how you have a debate, that's how you communicate. Today, the emotions that are involved with it, it's like a Chinese wall. I've been told this for my whole life. It is that there is no ifs, ands, buts, or buts about it. And when it gets to be like that and it gets to be emotional, then you don't have dialogue, then you don't have communications, and then you have anger, and then I hate to say this, after that, then you have violence. And you see that now pitting the oil and gas industry against that of the sustainability, the climate activism. And what happens, what gets distorted on both sides are the facts. And when people make decisions based upon emotion rather than actual logic and facts, that decision might feel good and sound right and believe it's right at the moment. But the long-term effects down the road, that's where it really starts to affect. For example, look at California. I'm going to spin this over to California. $4 for gasoline, mostly because of state taxes. But the community there thinks it's the big oil companies, when in reality it's the state taxing the crap out of gasoline, that people actually think oil and gas companies are the rich people, and that's the price that they set. Look at the power industry right now with winds. I've read an interesting article where a couple of those million people had to lose power in California because of high winds, and they said mainly it was because of clearing around wires, and that can cause brush fires and cause like the big wildfire. Well, I've heard multiple different sources that the main reason is because when you have excess winds, I believe above 55 miles an hour, I believe that's what the number is, wind turbines can't operate, and they're so heavily dependent upon wind turbines that they couldn't supply the power. And so they're saying people always prevent wildfires when indeed it's because they can't have the on-demand generation of power. And they want to take that model from California and they want to apply it to the United States. Could you imagine the anarchy? And I use that word because if you lose power, imagine the power going down for across the country, for a couple hours every single day. Bad things happen. But no one's talking about that. That's what really gets me upset, is because we're so emotional on both sides that we're not looking at it from humanity's perspective and all the benefits that abundant and free and affordable energy provide on a daily basis that we just take for granted. And that, I think, is a problem. We have to do a better job in our industry on partnering up and getting back into the schools, getting back into the communities, challenging people on the facts, but not allowing their emotions and their blowback against us to cause us to get guarded and get emotional and then bicker and bicker, because we miss the truth on both sides when we do that.
I truly believe, and I don't say this lightly, because the reason that we're doing a little bit more of the hard edge with the crude life now is because it's time to step up. 2020 will be the most important year for the energy industry and oil and gas specifically, at least in my lifetime, without a doubt. I mean, you've got an increasing number of presidential candidates actually saying we'll ban the industry. That to me is beyond fringe science. That to me is beyond a crazy statement. And the fact that any media would allow that statement to be made without any follow-ups. Oh, what's your plan then? Without any follow-ups is beyond reckless from the media standpoint. And it just shows you where we're at in today's world. I believe 2020 is going to be the most important year for oil and gas, because when I was at the Wildcatters golf event this summer in Casper, Wyoming, fantastic event, and I'm not saying this to bash the employees there, but I was in the lounge. I didn't golf. I was doing more interviewing and meetings and things like that. And so people would come in, have lunch, and they'd go and have a few drinks. Then they'd go and do their holes, and they'd go play the golf and, The next round, the gun flags off, this and that. Well, they had the whole country club rented for the weekend. And there was probably, 4 or 5 20 to 5 to 35-year-olds working behind the staff, working as staff members, this and that. And I'd watch them make several $100s over lunch, each one of them. And then when there was nobody in there but me, they'd talk amongst themselves, and they would bash oil and gas. They would make fun of oil and gas. Not in a way that was mean, not in a way that was malicious, just in a way that, college kids do. Just like Ross and Rachel and Joey sitting around drinking coffee at Central Perk on Friends. It wasn't, anything. It was just the way the narrative was going, was the way the society was going. And I would just look at them and think, I just watched you make $300 from a bunch of oil and gas people having fun, and you were smiling and loving life right to their face, and now you're bashing them. But you don't even know you're bashing them. That's the part that gets me, is they don't even really know they're doing that. And that's really hard for people to understand unless you can actually see it in the moment. That's what I think the oil and gas industry is up against, and that's why I'm really worried. And that's why I do believe that this is the most important year ever for the energy industry. You can't have this level of acceptance of people saying, let's get rid of an industry that powers 90% of our life. I don't even know what to tell you, man, because to me, it is truly bizarre. But yet, if I say anything, I'm considered the whack job. So I just kind of try to nudge it along and point it out and do some different things. But anyway, your thoughts on that? I just handed you a loaded hand grenade here. It's more of a conversation today rather than an interview. Have you noticed that?
Yes, and I like it because it flows better than being staged. And I think, this is a conversation that we need to have, and hopefully through your channels, it gets, of course, out to oil and gas individuals, but hopefully also it gets out to someone who's curious and who's trying to be objective and doing research and comes across this conversation and gets them to to think a little bit, be like, that's a good point, that JB had brought up, and that I would truly love to see that happen. So by all means, absolutely, I love a good conversation. But going back to your question on that, sometimes, and I've used this too, where I've played real dumb, in conversation with people just because I can see that, their way of life or how, what they're representing in public, just how someone is acting in public. I kind of can assume, okay, this person is probably, driving a Tesla, or they are driving a Tesla, or they're, wearing a shirt called ban fracking. And I'll approach them, but I won't go up and let them know I'm in the oil and gas industry. I actually go up as a concerned citizen. I play dumb. And sometimes just by allowing them to vent and to tell their concerns and then reply back with a question and learning to all of a sudden to get them thinking about it. Well, why do you believe that? Well, what if this happens? And I've been able to have good conversations with individuals by not going up and saying, okay, ban fracking, you know what you're talking about, it powers the world, giving all these facts. Well, that puts a wall up and they go defensive and you're not having conversation. A lot of the time when you just take time to listen to them, let them literally, vent, and then reason back with them saying, well, you said this, but if this happens, then therefore this doesn't happen. And sometimes a light bulb goes off. One of the greatest things that I use that really gets a lot of people, worked up sometimes is there'll be environmentalists and people against fracking and against oil and gas and everything under the sun. But everything about them, from the water bottle in their hand to the rubber on their shoes to the phone in their hands, is all provided in some way, shape, or form by the petro business, petrochemicals. And when you let them know that, they kind of go, wow. So I literally would have to be almost naked if I completely ban oil and gas. And when they realize that, because they just don't know, then it kind of gets a light bulb off, and they hopefully have more conversation with it. But we have to have those conversations. We have to get out. There's only about 1 million to maybe 2 million of us, somewhat in shape or form, in the oil and gas industry, across multitudes more that are just blatantly against oil and gas. So we have the numbers against us. But if we start having these smaller conversations and we start, getting people to open up and look at it objectively, we can go into 2020 strong. But we in the oil and gas industry, we have to take the lead on this. We have to tell the stories, and we have to communicate the benefits of it. And I think the burden is certainly on us. And I hope going into 2020 that we as a community come together outside of our bubble and start engaging these individuals, but do it in a way that does not cause them to be defensive, that removes the emotion portion of it and helps them to self-realize that we're not the enemy, and that our way of life and the way this country is and why it's so great and why we have the freedoms and the abilities we do is because of free and abundant energy. I mean, there's 4 billion people in the world today that literally don't have running water or power. But I used that stat one time to someone, and they had no idea there were 4 billion people. They thought everybody had food and water. They were clueless. And so if we're able to communicate that, in that methodology, I think we can really change not only the perspective here in the United States, but also across the world, and bring massive amounts of people out of poverty.
It's interesting you brought that up about, the poverty I'm going to bring to in just a second here, but was being able to communicate effectively, because to me, that's the problem. That is a major, major problem. And I do think energy companies need to have a little bit of a extra session in their meetings this year about public relations and communications and everything. And here's my argument for it. And it's tough for me because I work in that industry. You know what I mean? I'm in the communication industry, so it's very easy for somebody like me to say I'm working for my sales department at this point because I'm given, think of us. No, that's not what I'm doing. What I'm doing here is I'm saying we've had some of the top CEOs in the industry on this program, especially in the early days, back when, they were accessible. Now they're like rare albino white elks. You can't find them hardly. 5 years ago during $100 oil, man, they were all over the place. But they all, I'm, Harold Hamm, Tommy News, James Volker, John Gibson, just to name a few, not to name drop, just to actually legitimately name a few. They all said the word paradigm shift. And they're not ones to exaggerate. They had examples behind the paradigm shift of hydraulic fracturing and horizontal drilling, how it's changed everything. It's changed everything from the innovation side. It's changed the natural gas side of things. It's changed how the sensors and remote monitoring is working. We have remote fracking now. You've got big data, which has completely revolutionized human resources. You've got big data that's completely revolutionized the safety areas and regulations. So why wouldn't your communications and your public relations and your marketing go through a paradigm shift too? So I do think that is the one part that the energy companies and the service companies need to look at and say, how much have we done the same for the last 10 years? And if we're doing the same thing, is it working? Because it might be working. Again, I'm not asking you to change it. I'm just saying if it's not working or it's not communicating effectively, maybe it's time to look at something else. One guy in Pennsylvania, you mentioned you're from Pennsylvania, he went out and bought a minor league baseball team and called it the Junior Frackers. Now, I wouldn't do that, but at least it's something different. Now you've got people associating the word fracking with something positive, because going to a baseball game is fun. So now at least you've got an association in a positive way. Again, it's not my cup of tea, but God bless them for trying something different. Again, we're sponsoring a guy who's the greatest environmentalist on earth to go out and engage with kids in a pro wrestling, cartoon, comical, kind of a hipster, cool kind of way. Is it going to work? No idea. But at least it's a paradigm shift how we're doing things. What are your thoughts on that, what I just said, as far as, when you look at a marketing, a public relations, an interaction and an engagement, that paradigm shift example I just brought up?
You bring up a good point, because one of the things that's really got underneath my skin, and sometimes I've allowed it, and you can see through my socials and things, is when a company, especially over in Europe, called Climate Action 100, where they are going in and they're cutting off funding, basically, through investors, going into the 401ks of fund managers, hedge funds, etc. All the people that have the capital, and basically saying what you're doing is, lack of better words, it's evil, it's killing the earth, and they've all routed around to basically take out their liquidity and their capital. And that climate action, that's why you see companies like Total and you see companies like Shell coming out saying, basically what we've done for the last 100 years, we're going in opposite complete direction. What we've done is wrong. Admit liability and fault. And now it's become, contagion, and now it's coming across here in the United States, and you're starting to see it now through the big operators and smaller operators here in the United States. And I sit back and I think to myself, these companies are basically saying, in an indirect way, saying what they're doing is wrong, and it just gets me, because what company goes out there and tries to sell something or do something, but then comes out and says, oh, we're at fault, or we're killing the earth, or we're polluters, because of the fear of losing the liquidity and things of that nature. And at the root of it, it goes back, and I say, man, if they just had a strong communications department, a strong PR department to help push back on that narrative, it would be a game changer. But they're allowing that narrative, that to be controlled by these other, Climate Action 100, other, whatever word you want to put, climate activists, fractivists, things of that nature, because they don't have the ability to push back and push back professionally. And I think that's mainly because they have, and I always say this now too, I say it's not your daddy's oil field. And I think the Good Old Boys Club, it's been around, we've done it this way for 30 years, this is how it's done, we've always, had people, protesters, they're going to go away, they're going to, we're going to be okay. Well, it's a whole different ballgame with social media today. You don't get your news from the newspaper, or the younger generations don't read the news from the newspaper anymore. It's something that goes viral. It's something that's on YouTube. It's something that's on LinkedIn and Instagram. And then people collectively want to be so involved in that collective, because they don't want to, they say FOMO, fear of missing out, that sometimes they join the bandwagon. They have no idea what bandwagon they're on or where it's going. They just want to be included. And there's nothing there to push back and to correct and help the truth. And I think PR departments have to come together, even collectively, to say we need to have a coalition, for lack of better words, to unite and to push back against when someone comes out and says, that we're going to ban fracking. There should be a huge coalition out there that would fight back on that. And my political sense goes back to why isn't there a true pro-energy, lack of better words, pro-frack pack that would actually buy airtime across the media channels and push back against Elizabeth Warren and people that are going to come out and just ban frack? But
I think there already are. But again, I go back to, and this is not sour grapes or me trying to pick a fight, but those exist. But it's the same resources with the same people giving you the same results. And in fact, I wanted to bring this up because I'm looking at the clock. We got about 5 minutes left here, but I wanted to bring this up. I brought my son to the Williston Basin Petroleum Council, the Williston Basin Petroleum Conference. It's a big one, and every year they have it in Canada, and then they have it in the Bakken. They kind of go back and forth. And I think this was the year that maybe Sean Hannity was there. And I brought my son, and he's done professional interviews, and so he knows the media. He's been doing it since he was 8 years old. He was, I think, 12 at the time. Interviewed Harold Hamm at this thing. He interviewed who else? Rick Ross from Whiting. He got better interviews than I did, actually. But at this thing, there was a bike there that had no petroleum products, and it was basically like a metal frame. I get it. Okay, trying to connect with the kids on the bike level, this and that, and it's a good attempt. But the person that was doing it was almost like they were lecturing the kid. And I see that a lot in our industry, to when we engage with people it's almost like we're lecturing them because it is tough. I imagine farmers went through the same thing. That when you supply so much of something and the general public becomes ungrateful, you kind of get a little upset. And so as I watch this guy, and he probably should have been coached a little bit different or maybe had a different presentation, but the culture, it certainly didn't stand out except for the kid who's not part of that culture. Because he's not part of the day-to-day, so he doesn't understand the idiosyncrasies of the industry, and he doesn't understand the jokes and all these other things. So it came across as, some old dude trying to lecture him on why oil and gas rocks. So it turned him off even more. And I thought to myself, boy, that's how good old boy we get as an industry. Even trying to do the right thing, we can still turn people off. And that's when I started, again, it's a tough thing because if you speak up, first of all, if you speak up like I am right now, I already know there's people that have held it against me, and it's cost me financially just speaking up. Secondly, if you mention anything, well, that guy might be really well liked. So now you got people sticking up for that guy instead of maybe saying we should, coach him differently or figure out a new message because the next guy had the same message and it was coming across as a lecture. You know what I mean? So it was just, anyway, my point is that if you try to speak up in the industry, you might get some repercussions. And then if you try to speak engagingly, we have to be aware that we can come across as almost, you got to remember, energy is one of the kings of the economy. So you have a big responsibility just do that alone. And I think we forget that sometimes too. Anyway, it was more of a story, and I kind of wanted to get your reaction on my real life anecdote story in terms of paradigm shift with public relations in the industry.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that with me. And you're right, because one of the other things that all of our conversation we've had today and the different topics, if you really boil it down to one word, it comes down to humanity and how we treat each other in the industry or on the clean energy industry, whatever side of the spectrum that you're on. If we do not have civil conversation and how we communicate and how we treat each other and how we tell our stories, then nothing will change, and everything will be polarized on both sides, and you won't progress together. And I think, on the humanity side, like the case with your son, is that we have to push back and hold each other accountable and call each other out when we see some things wrong. For example, let's say you come out and you had said something, and like you said, you got some blowback or pushback. Well, what if you're right? Who comes to your side and backs you up, or who holds each other accountable and says, man, your approach on that topic was a bit harsh. You may want to choose better words. That self accountability and accountability to each other is crucial. And if we all just take a step back and breathe and remember that it's about humanity, I think we can really, move forward and progress together. But we have to get out of this bubble of, this is the way we've done it for 30 years. This is, as I say, it's not your daddy's oil field, and we're losing the time the time right now because there's an entire generation, literally an entire generation, that knows nothing about what the oil and gas industry has done, and will do for humanity. And if we're able to address that and take a step forward together and help push back professionally, I think our industry can be great going into 2020. It's a new decade. But if we don't start doing it the next couple of years, we're going to lose that generation for good. And I'd hate to see what the oil and gas industry is going to look like at the end of this upcoming decade. If we don't change course here pretty quickly, I think it's not going to look very positive.
Wrapping up here, I just wanted to mention, I'm so glad you brought up the poverty part of it, and people, I think it's poverty and people without water and everything like that, because these are real issues happening today. And one of my contentions for 2020 as far as my speaking circuit is that I'm going to go out and tell college kids that my contention is that one of the main drivers behind the new Green Deal is, now I got to massage this a little bit because this is going to be pretty blunt, but we've got billions of people without power. We've got billions of people without water. We've got billions of people that are living in poverty, and yet we want to commit trillions of dollars to the future of a bunch of unknown. We have major problems right now on this planet that we need to solve. But what the public conversation across the globe is continually and increasingly going to be is, well, we better give up all of our rights and hand over our checkbook for the problem to solve 100 years from now. That is amazing to me, that amount of anxiety, that amount of fear, and that amount of speculation without any science. Now, sure, you've got consensus science, but the difference between consensus science and regular science is that if you put 1,000 scientists into a room and you ask them and you say, does the earth revolve around the sun? 1,000 of those scientists will say, yes, it does. That's science. But when you put 1,000 scientists in a room and only half of them agree with it, that's consensus science. So when you don't even have actual science, you have consensus science, which is politically motivated and special interest driven. You can go back history and history. Like I said, nobody argues that the moon revolves around the earth. Everybody knows that's just science. But you still got arguments out on what the climate's going to be next week, let alone 100 years from now. So my contention is that my conspiracy theory is, and I love a good conspiracy theory because what the heck, we might as well go that far. I just truly believe that it's a smokescreen to not focus on the problems that we have on today's world. We've got people without water, we've got people without electricity, and we've got people that are poor, really, really poor. And we've got so many means to take care of that, but yet we got to give up our rights and our pocketbook for a problem of a solution 100 years from now. Anyway, your thought on that. You brought up the poverty, and I wanted to make sure I got that in there. Like I said, I'm still massaging it a little bit for when I bring it out to the public, but that's the idea behind it, is kind of the whatever happened to the problems we have today to solve today.
Yeah, going off of that with poverty, what a great opportunity right now that the oil and gas industry has on two portions of it. Number one, power generation, being able to, especially here in the Permian, taking all that flaring, all that well gas, and then being able to convert it into electricity through gas turbines. Getting those turbines, more power, smaller size, less cost, etc. And that'll come with time. So you can take those units and literally power up very remote villages is one way. But here's the other portion of it too. And we have a long way to go in the oil and gas industry right now on recycling produced water and water treatment. The amount of water that's used, in fracs and then refracs, et cetera. I won't get into the details on that. It's another story for another day. And most of the time they drill new wells for fresh water because it's more economical than recycling right now from a cents per barrel perspective. But imagine if the oil and gas industry is able to come up with a way to truly purify water and desalinate it at an affordable rate and make those units smaller and portable. We can go to every remote village and every poor, country, all the 4 billion people that are dying because of lack of drinking water or sanitation or power, and be able to say oil and gas industry is able to provide this device to purify your water and at no cost to you. The impact across the world that would make. And that's not solar, that's not clean energy, it's actually delivering on humanity, delivering on humanity and from the oil and gas industry. And I bring this up all the time to different recycling companies that are having new technologies and new solutions. And I poke the bear a little bit and I say, well, okay, this is great, it goes down to Bryn water. But when can we get it down to the point that it can be agricultural grade, or when it can be actual, non-potable, but actually drinkable? And then we could take that technology and deploy it across the world. Imagine the impact that would make from the oil and gas industry, solving a problem for oil and gas industry that is applicable to all of humanity across the world and bringing 4 billion people out of poverty. What a great story, and what a great pushback that would be to all of the environmentalists. and that really inspires me, and that's why I love the oil and gas industry, because the innovation and what we can do for humanity is there. We just have to get off of our old days in the way that Daddy did it, Daddy's oil field, and embrace the technology, embrace our communication, embrace how we address the public, and re-educate everyone, and we can change humanity. I really truly believe that.
Make sure you give your company a plug, what your services are, how people can get in touch with you, all that good stuff. Appreciate you coming on the program today to share your mind and your experience and everything else like that. So the least we can do is let people know how you make a living out there.
But thank you so much for having me. My name is Joseph Bendik. I go by JB Bendik. My company is called the Navitas organization, or TNO for short. And we're retained strategists in the oil and gas industry, bringing new technology and solutions to the marketplace.